This is the My Campaign Coach podcast, where we talk about how to win elections. Every week, we let you hear straight from the best consultants, operatives, and candidates in the game, all for one reason, to help you win. For more information about how we can help you win, visit mycampaigncoach.com. Now, here's your host, Raj Schaefer.
All right, Brian, thanks for being with us today. It's a pleasure to have you on the My Campaign Coach podcast. You're currently the communication director for Media Trackers based up in Wisconsin. Tell me a little bit more about how you got into politics and the path that brought you into making it a career.
Hey, Raz. Yeah, thanks for having me on today. It's been an interesting path. I never really envisioned myself working for a conservative nonprofit, let alone a media watchdog. I'm originally from the state of Indiana, which is a pretty deep red state, and that's where I got my start in politics, working on grassroots campaigns, and really learned an important lesson pretty early on, and that is if you want to make this a career, if you want to be able to actually pay the bills by doing politics, you have to put your time in and you have to pay your dues. And people don't really care if you have a degree in political science. People don't care if you have some sort of credential that says you went and studied this. What people care about is whether or not you've been involved in the political process. And that usually means, have you knocked on doors? Have you pounded yard signs into the ground? Have you made phone calls?
The fun stuff.
And that's the dues. Those are the dues that you have to pay to kind of be seen as a credible individual worthy of being hired and getting a paid gig down the road. There's other paths, I realized, but that was the one that I found that worked for me. I worked on behalf of a local Republican Party in Indiana for a while in two different counties. I was in northern Indiana. I worked for Congressman Chris re-election campaign as just a volunteer, putting my heart and soul into it. 2006, which was not a good year to be supporting Republican House candidates.
Not at all.
And then from those experiences, I was able to build relationships and networks and connections that led to working for a couple different consulting firms, working for, it's actually called Gridiron Strategies now.
Yeah, Chris Faulkner. Good buddy.
Chris does some great direct mail work. He's based out of California now. And then working with candidates that began hiring me. And I got my start in media by getting hired as a communications director for a mayoral campaign in South Bend, Indiana. And the campaign, was not a success. We didn't oust the incumbent mayor, but I learned a lot about dealing with the media, dealing with the press. How do you have a professional media presence as a candidate in a campaign? How do you look for excuses to get the media to mention your candidate and your campaign and what you're doing? How do you hold a press conference? How do you write a press release? And I applied that later on whenever I ended up being the communications director for a congressional campaign that was working in that same media market. So after doing that for a number of years, I moved to Wisconsin and did some new media work, kind of social media website development for both businesses and nonprofits, and then some small campaigns both in Indiana and then in Wisconsin. And then in 2011, decided I wanted to get back in the fight full time and connected with this guy named Drew Ryan, who's part of the vast right-wing conspiracy.
Exactly. He's got us both well entrenched in this vast right-wing conspiracy.
He does. Found out about this group called Media Trackers that needed staff. They were hiring staff in Wisconsin. 2011 was when Governor Scott Walker introduced his collective bargaining reforms to change the way public sector unions were able to interact with government and able to interact basically with taxpayer dollars. And so there was a lot of hullabaloo on the left. Recall elections were coming up. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a really awesome time to be kind of engaged with the media. So I jumped on that. And then working with a small team that we had here in Wisconsin, we began just looking for ways to hold the media accountable and then to expose the left. And kind of doing that old investigative journalism that newspapers and television stations don't do anymore because it takes up too much resources. And as we did that, we saw success because we'd find interesting information, we'd push that out to media outlets, and that's pretty much what we've been doing since 2011, is kind of helping define the debate in Wisconsin by pushing reporters to be more transparent and more balanced in their coverage of political issues and of candidates. And then we've also been putting the left on defense, forcing them to explain themselves, forcing liberal candidates to explain their actions, probably at a time where they'd rather be talking about something else.
That's most of the time. They normally prefer to be talking about something else. Well, you've definitely had a career path that's similar to mine and similar to most of the folks that I look up to as far as bootstrapping and starting out with the very, very bottom of the totem pole type activities. Whenever I'm talking, especially young people in college, recent college grads that want to be involved in full-time politics, it's kind of frustrating me how many of them, they want to see their first job as being in front of a news camera or being in a studio. That's some people do that. Very few people that have started that way are ones that I respect a whole lot. Not necessarily because I have some feeling like they didn't pay their dues, but just generally you end up seeing there is a specific character type that often develops as a result of that. Whereas there's definitely a work ethic I appreciate. And just simply from a numbers standpoint, if you're wanting to get involved in politics and that's where you want to end up, willingness to start at the bottom and do any job, believing that there's no job too small for you, whether it's taking out the trash or going and buying donuts and coffee or knocking doors, making phone calls. I mean, that's how you show your work ethic. And there's a lot about politics you can teach. I mean, through my campaign coach, we do a lot to try to teach people how to be effective candidates and campaign managers. But what you can't teach is character and work ethic. And those are ingrained very early on, and you seldom see people change those types of things about themselves, at least as far as in a good way later in life. But those are the two main things that I know I look for, that Drew's looked for, and that you look for when we're hiring people or trying to identify the next generation of talent. And they're sadly in low supply. But when you see them, they really stand out as a result.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things that a degree will not give you if you're looking to get into politics or even the conservative new media, and that is it won't give you connections. Now, I know there's alumni fellowships and associations and all these different foundation things you can go to and, claim your alma mater, and that's helpful.
Right.
There's also the fact that it won't give you experience, and you need to have connections outside your alma mater and outside of the few people that graduated from there because it's a big world. And no school has a monopoly on good jobs in politics in any given state. And no school will give you real world experience. It'll give you head knowledge, which you're going to need, but it won't give you that real world experience, and it won't let people test who you are, as you pointed out. Like a future employer wants to know, how loyal are you?
Yeah, exactly.
And they may not have a high value position available. It may be a pretty low job as a field director or something, or as an intern.
Right.
But that will put you in touch with a lot of people that you would otherwise have never met. And then it will also allow you to gain some pretty broad experiences that will be useful in whatever you do. And as you point out, it shows that you as an individual are a hardworking person.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is I've never actually got a job that I applied for. I don't think the vast majority, pretty much all the jobs that I can think of that I've had, they've come to me just as a result of folks getting to know me through seeing me working. And that's how I met Drew. Now, how he hired me straight out of college, I love Hillsdale College and where I went, and it's done a lot for me. But that's the fact that I had a degree from there, or was going to get one 2 days later when Drew gave me the job offer. That's not what decided the things in my favor. It was that we had a mutual friend who had said he was somebody I could trust and I'd work hard, and Drew hired me. And he pulls the trigger and makes gut calls about character and hiring a little bit quicker than most people do. But it's we can be a little bit conceited and say it worked out pretty well for him so far. At least in our cases. We can't speak for them all.
It has. And it's one of those things, too, where you make that call with people, and I've had my share of hiring people at media trackers. And, some people work out and some don't. Some people you find out that maybe they'd be better suited elsewhere in the conservative movement. I've been happy to help those people find different jobs. Other people, they kind of their own accord do themselves a disservice and end up down the road. But eventually, you don't really know a person until they've been working for you, or unless they come highly recommended from someone you trust. And that's where just putting aside whatever you thought you were going to be doing when you got out of college, or whatever you thought you'd be doing the moment you volunteered for your local Republican Party or whatever you're doing, and just accepting whatever comes your way and determining to be the very best at that you can be, will go a long way in proving your worth and getting you a job in the business.
Yeah, if you come out and you're trying to get into politics and you've got some firm timeline of I'm going to be here in a year and I'll be there in 2 years, that's not going to work out well for you in general. It may work out in some a little more structured corporate environments, but for me, because I was not focused on where I was going next, I was focused on being the best damn guy for my job, whatever it was. The opportunities I've had and things I've got to do have been so much more than I ever could have planned for. And that's a God thing, and that's as a result of a work ethic and providence. And the loyalty factor that you mentioned you cannot oversell that importance, because in politics especially, you're dealing with a lot of privileged information, whether it's actual confidential information or whether it's just people being able to trust you. And my ability to know that when I'm talking to you or to Drew or to other guys that we trust, when I know that I don't have to tell you every time, that this is something that should not go further, that you have a good enough sense of loyalty to me and general prudence that you're going to be able to weigh some of that stuff out. That's how we build a relationship to the point where we can watch each other's backs and we can work together for the good of a movement. And a lot of that comes down to the fact that what we have in common beyond loyalty, and part of what engenders that loyalty, is that we know we're in this for a purpose, to fight for principle, not just a paycheck and not just a title. And that's generally how we like to surround ourselves with people that share those same principles, because share the same principles, you've got a decent work ethic, and you're willing to, you're going to be loyal and fight for your guys, then you're somebody that I definitely want on my side and would like to have a closer relationship with. That's for sure.
No, absolutely. And I think that you bring up a good point when you talk about the fact that the motivation for why you want to get a job. And if you're in politics or working in media to promote and champion conservative ideas, conservative principles, that is more commendable than doing it for the sake of merely being a job, or doing it because you want power, because eventually people are going to self-implode. There's no HIPAA laws that prevents the release of information. There's no banking regulation that says you can't share this information with certain people. It's very much an individual honor and trust-based culture. And your true colors are eventually going to show under pressure, with different opportunities that come your way, with a chance to either make yourself look good by leaking something to someone else about what your campaign's doing, a chance to maybe fudge the details a little bit. There are enough tests of individual character that you will be revealed for who you are. And
yes.
If you're not here to actually make a difference, and I'm convinced the reason the left is successful a lot of times is their operatives aren't just pragmatic. They're pragmatic and wanting to win at all cost, but they're doing it for a very specific cause. And there's this overriding desire, because they believe that their outlook on the future of the country is important enough to mandate a sense of loyalty amongst each other. That's not to say they don't have their infighting like our side has.
Yeah.
We have to understand that as conservatives and realize that, part of the reason maybe Republicans have struggled in recent election cycles is because there have been too many people that were in this for the money and not because they actually wanted to win for the right reasons.
I totally agree. So now you're, as a communications director for Media Trackers, you function as both an observer, a fact checker of the media, and as an actual member of said media. So, as we're talking to candidates and we're trying to train people, it's important for us to look to the pitfalls that we see on a common basis. And you're more qualified than most to address those and kind of look at some of the major problems that those guys face. What, in your experience, have been some of the biggest pitfalls, or at least the most common ones that candidates find themselves in, and how can they, either extricate themselves once they find themselves in said hole, or can they ideally avoid them?
Yeah, well, there's two ways to doom your candidacy pretty quickly, and then to end up on the front page of the newspaper, or at least getting some media attention of some sort, and that is a campaign finance violation of some sort. You missed a deadline, you filed a wrong report, you didn't get your ethics disclosure done right, and then saying something really stupid that you shouldn't say. And it could be as simple as putting something on Facebook, because one thing that trips a lot of candidates up is they don't realize once you're running for office, everything is under scrutiny.
Yeah.
Your social media is under scrutiny, and you do not speak apart from being a candidate. There is no, hey, I was just with my pals joking around when I said that or when I posted that. Everything you say is in the context of the office you're running for. So if you're running for state assembly, then there you go. You're going to be seen. Everything you say is going to be observed as coming from someone who wants to have this job, to represent this district at the state capitol. So don't say dumb things, and just keep it classy. And a couple of rules. If you'd be embarrassed to tell your mom or your spouse, then you probably shouldn't be saying it. If you'd be embarrassed to stand up in front of someone who is a member of that, whether it's an ethnic group or anything else, that religion, and say that, then you probably shouldn't be saying that, because it's not a nice thing to say. And then the other thing is, you got to make sure that you don't treat the media as an enemy.
Right.
So on the one hand, don't give them fodder to write about that you don't want them to write about. So that's why you make sure you do your ethics right, your finance stuff right, and you don't say dumb stuff. And then when you do want them to talk about something, because inevitably you do want them to talk about you, okay, you want them to talk about how awesome you are, how you love the community, how you coach soccer, and then how you have this great idea for how we can fix our roads and make sure that we don't have to raise taxes to do it or something like that. You've got these policy ideas that have led you to now run for office, and you want favorable media attention. You can't hate the media. And it's something that I think I've really seen a lot with this election cycle is there's been for several cycles now an ongoing feud between right of center candidates and the media. Now, it is true that the media is biased. It is true that more often than not, the left will, through a number of biases, whether it's editorial bias or the way they frame the debate, they will be biased in favor of liberal candidates, left of center candidates, or left of center positions and ideas. But the solution is not to hate the media. The media does give a lot of free advertising to the other side. That's an absolute fact. They may do that against your opponent. But you have to treat them with respect. Treat them as individual people and work with them and let them know that you're not the enemy. And let your own team know that they're not the enemy. I was at a rally recently with a prominent presidential candidate who said some things about the media that some were true, some were quite so true. And there was a palpable tension between, the press pen, which is where I was sitting, and some of the mainstream media reporters there, and the crowd that was there at the rally. That's not a dynamic you really want to replicate
No.
as you go forward with your campaign. You want to treat the media with respect and be courteous to them, but don't be afraid to be firm with them. That's something our organization in particular has had to work with as a balance, because on the one hand, we're calling out media bias. In a few minutes, I'm going to get off here. I'm going to published a story about a prominent environmental reporter in the state of Wisconsin who completely missed a huge fact about a story recently that really shows that the judge was biased in the decision he reached. So I'm going to call them out, but I'm a little bit more free to do that because it's our job. We're a watchdog. But at the same time, there are other reporters that I work with a little bit more closely that I'll send information to, that I try to develop that personal relationship with. And as a candidate, you have to be firm and polite whenever you correct the facts, because they may misrepresent something you said, and you got to politely correct them. Better yet, have your campaign manager do it instead of you. And then don't treat them as the enemy. Even though you want to make sure they're doing the right thing, and even though you're aware of their bias, just treat them respectfully.
Well, and especially if these are regular reporters you're going to run into, if these aren't just somebody that's writing a one-off story about you from somebody somewhere outside of your district. I know one of the things that Senator Cruz does, former boss of mine, and something I worked hard for, and you do as well. One of the things that he does is, he looks at these guys as more than people. And so, Cruz has said more than a few things, criticized the media, and has more than a few reasons to criticize the media. But he sees these folks as more than their jobs. And so he's never antagonistic towards individual reporters, especially the ones that are out there doing the coverage or asking these questions during the press conferences. I actually saw him I was with him at a press avail yesterday to get out the vote center here in Texas. And the press is there and asking him some really pointed questions about his Trump endorsement, and about some policies, and about the internet giveaway, and a bunch of policy issue stuff. But he was there talking with these guys and chatting before and after. And while he was very pointed and very direct, and even pushed back against some of the questions they're asking, he's smart enough to realize that in many cases it's not even the reporters that are coming up with the questions. Right, they have their managers, they have their editors who are telling them, hey, you need to do these things and you need to cover it this way. And so he knows he has to respond to those questions, and he can, on the record, push back against those. But when the cameras are off, he's not going to totally let his guard down, because that's just stupid. But he's going to be able. He's asking these guys about their kids. He's talking about the baseball team that they're a fan of. He knows these things about them because he spent a lot of time on the road with them through Texas and nationally. But it's being able to have realize that those, especially on the individual level, they are not the enemy, and they can actually help you a great deal. Treat it like any other relationship. You want it to be positive, and you want to give them every opportunity to see you in a good light. So hopefully they'll write about the positives and not just the negatives.
Yeah, one thing kind of on the topic of Senator Cruz, I took a leave of absence from my day job during the presidential primary when it moved through Wisconsin to help the Cruz campaign out. And I was able to see Senator Cruz in a number of settings with the press, and the kind of the infamous press conference where he was beating back rumors from National Enquirer was a pretty interesting press conference, because there were a lot of hostile questions coming there.
Was this the one about how he had so many affairs, or about his dad killing JFK?
No, this was the affairs one.
Okay.
So it all exploded in North Wisconsin
That's
primary.
A fun week.
So you got the national press is here. It was actually in a warehouse in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, where he just finished up a rally, and a quick press conference was held. And there's a couple things that kind of came out of that. One, be honest and be confident in your honesty. So don't play into the wrong presupposition, the wrong question that they're asking, because they're going to come with their own. The questions are going to come, and reporters are going to have their own agenda or their own outlook. Don't assume the premise of their question is correct.
Right.
Be unashamed to stand up for actually what the true facts are, but don't be hostile about it. I mean, one of the things that was really, really helpful was what drives media today is clickbait. And whether you're the New York Times and you consider yourself the newspaper of record, or whether you're the local blog, you want to get clicks. You want to get that digital traffic. What gets digital traffic? Sensational headlines. How do you get sensational headlines? People say dumb things, or they go over the top and get a little overheated in their rhetoric, and that allows you to frame a story in such a way that people are going to watch the nightly news because they heard it previewed in such a way they want to click on that story. So you want to try to diffuse that and make sure that if you do say something that's strident and that is noteworthy, that it plays into your narrative. And so most candidates aren't going to be operating at the presidential campaign level. So my advice to the average candidate out there running is say what you need to say, answer the question you want to answer. Okay? That doesn't mean you'll completely evade the question. If you're getting asked about something and the premise is wrong, don't repeat the charge and the flawed premise. Just give the answer that you want to use. Give the answer you want to give, because that's all they're going to be able to run with. A reporter, no matter how biased they are, can't make up quotes that were never said. They can only quote what you actually said. So make sure you know what you want to say before you step behind a microphone, before you actually address a question. And if a question comes up, you don't like the premise of it, shrug it off, say, well, actually, this is what's going on. And then answer that question that you want to answer, not the question they asked.
Well, and Ted's a master at that, that's for sure. But as a candidate, beyond Brian's 2 rules of don't do anything illegal or stupid, which are good life rules as well as campaign rules. I like those. That'll solve all your campaign problems right there. You can turn this off. So just don't do those things. But when it comes to media interactions, especially when you're talking about a less experienced person than a Ted Cruz or somebody that's on a smaller stage, preparing for media contact, there's a lot you can do from doing recorded interactions, to introduce doing demo stuff, getting grilled by friends or family that will put on that black hat for a little bit. You put yourselves in mock debates with other folks you're less familiar with. You can do recording your stump speech on down the line. There's a lot of different tactics and procedures that folks use to prepare. What are some of your favorites and that you've seen work really well?
Well, a couple of things that I would recommend. Think through in your own head what you want to say. If you're driving along in your head, you're driving to a local newspaper editorial board, okay? Try to game out in your mind some of those questions. I think there's a flawed perception that there are good public speakers and there are bad public speakers. And if you're kind of on the margin of maybe being just a mediocre public speaker, or if you're in the bad public speaker category, you can see somebody who's a good public speaker. I think of Governor Mike Pence of Indiana. And we're recording this just after his, I think it was a pretty outstanding performance in the vice presidential debate. He was debating both his nominee and Democratic opponents. That made it challenging.
Not an enviable position to be in, that's for sure.
No, but he had some really good lines that he delivered. And, I've heard great political speeches. I've heard great interviews. And people that are good public speakers don't just come up with those lines on the fly. They think about them. And it helps if you're not having a staff person say this. But make your ideas your own. Make your words your own. Think through this. Engage your mind just as much as you would in a normal conversation. That you put a little bit of thought into, like, how am I going to address this? If there's an important conversation you need to have with a close person in your life, it's a family member, a spouse, an employer, an employee, you're going to think through what you want to say and what are the key things you need to talk about. So those key things are going to be your talking points.
Well, and if you're putting yourself in a position where you're thinking through and scripting out what you're going to say, that helps cut down on the number of stupid things you say, right? Because it's kind of the same principle of, like, Mark Twain is famous for writing a long letter to a friend and apologizing because he didn't have the time to write him a short letter, so he wrote him a long one. And I know that for myself, I fall in this trap a lot of not scripting out what I'm going to say. And as a result, I use a lot more words than are necessary. And I can ramble or go on rabbit trails. And when you do that, that opens up all kinds of doors for being distracted or for going off in directions and saying stuff that you didn't ever intend to bring up, or making quotes that you definitely didn't want to make that day just because you were unprepared. Whereas if you spend, it's going to take you a lot more time to write and edit and rehearse. But man, that's the speeches that we think of, that we remember, the quotes that we read and they stick with us. These were not generally just off the cuff. They were most likely prepared. I mean, you look at a guy like Winston Churchill, one of the most famous orators of the last few centuries, and he spent great amounts of time, both being educated originally as well as on every speech, poring over it. He didn't just tell a speechwriter, hey, write me 500 words or 2,000 words on this. He actually poured over the details. And while none of us may end up being a Winston Churchill, there's the same idea holds true as far as general communications.
Yeah, no, a great line, well delivered, is not a spontaneous act of genius. It's the product of a lot of mental sweat. You have to think through what you're going to say. You have to contemplate how you approach an issue. And something I've found that candidates can run into trouble with is either they don't have talking points that they've written for themselves, or they think they can use like a speechwriter because someone else wrote the speech for them. And it may be original to you, you're not lifting it from some other candidate, but if you're running for office, people know you're genuine. And that doesn't mean you can't be professional and you have short, succinct answers, but it means that you need to have your own answers to some of these issues and to whatever you're talking about. You need to be able to have your own compelling reasons for why you're running. I would always recommend if you're running for office, have that elevator speech. These are the 3 things why I'm running for. This is who I am. 3 reasons why I'm running. Can I have your vote? Kind of like what you give whenever you knock on the door to someone.
Well, in our coaching, during Brian, you're actually in our coaching program right now, and during the first week, when the first pieces of strategy we work through is working on that, and we start with the 3 whys: why me, why now, and why this office. And you start out that by basically our first instruction is to just turn off your phone, get in a quiet place with a pad of paper, and just kind of just vomit all these words on a page, all your motivations, and not worry about the format or the structure or the how many syllables are in the words. You just want to get that out there, and you can edit it down. But what you establish over through your campaign and every time you open your mouth is really what your voice is. And people that are listening to you and they're listening to your speeches, especially people from the media who it's their job to review and know what you're saying, they're going to be able to tell, and it's maybe not even a conscious thing sometimes, so they can tell when you're saying your words versus somebody else's words. And that's why when you look at, especially on the presidential level, these guys and their speech writers, there's a very intimate relationship. They spend a lot of time around them, whether they're writing speeches or not. And they spend a lot of time reading what they've said before and putting themselves in that individual's head and establishing, kind of finding their voice. And so what you want to do, especially if you're a lower level candidate that doesn't have a staff speech writer, that doesn't have somebody that's written for publications, and it may be, maybe they can put together some punctuation, but you want to work together, and have your message. They may be able to draft out something or put together some outlines or some major talking points, but you need to make sure that you go through there and think through exactly what you're going to say on those, that you keep yourself away from opening doors you don't want opened. For instance, as far as the media deal, something I've seen some candidates do is they'll be talking along, answering a question, and then they'll make a side comment that's nearly unintentional, and that opens the door for a question that they did not want. They're actually bringing something into conversation that they really shouldn't have. And that ends up being the story, was their side comment on whatever the question is, because they weren't ready to talk about it, but the reporter grabs onto their little side comment, asks them a question, and they're unprepared to go down that hole. So you really got to think through what are the possible positive and negative permutations of that conversation to make sure you're actually ready to talk about all that stuff. And you got to have escape plans. You got to know how you're going to close this thing down. Yeah. Because anytime you got to know how to disengage from that situation with some poise. You don't want to just be running for your life. You got to have a plan, and you got to be able to know how you're going to run it, whether that's how your staff are going to disengage you. If they start seeing that you're going off the rails and you don't see it yet, know the signals and follow your staff. I've seen and been part of those kind of operations before when you have a holy crap moment. This is going sideways fast, and you got to get the principal out of there. And so you got to think through all those things. But it's one of those areas where a little bit of preparation goes a very long way. And also keep in mind, one of the things I like to do is start small. Just like from fundraising, you're going to start with your friends and family, people that know you well. Start out with those people as far as honing your pitch, and get practice in delivering that, get feedback on a friendly basis, and then find friends or people that have media experience to give you feedback on that as well.
Yeah. Another thing too to keep in mind is shorter is always better. I've been there at Lincoln Day dinners where the 4th county commissioner candidate just got up after the governor spoke, lieutenant governor, the attorney general candidate. Like, we're way down the list now, and this 4th county commissioner candidate, boy, he's got a great stump speech and he wants to go on for about 10 minutes, and nobody cares. It's late, everybody wants to get home, and you kind of build this image of people hating you because you spoke for too long. So if you're running for office, keep it short. Unless you really are running for an office where people really care and pay a lot of attention to it, and I know you care because if you're a candidate, you should be caring about this office, but be short and be brief. And there's a couple of benefits to that. First, people appreciate that you respect their time, and that includes reporters. Even reporters, they have busy schedules. They don't want to spend a lot of time on the phone with a candidate who just keeps going on and on and on, unless you're maybe going on down these rabbit trails, which can get really interesting really fast for them. Keep it short. That allows you to keep full control of your message. It allows you to be respectful of your audience, and it allows you to kind of limit what can be taken away from it. Because if you come up and you're confident, you know your intro, you know the 2 or 3 points you're going to say, because you should never have a press conference where there's more than 2 or 3 points, and sometimes it can be as little as 1 point. And then you know how you're going to get off that stage, how you're going to either exit the stage or step away from the microphones, or how you're going to close out that radio interview. You're golden. Because if you come off as confident, poised, and you know what you're talking about, you can make a couple of mistakes in the delivery, but if you're always confident about it, that's going to leave a really positive impression in the minds of anybody who ends up watching that TV clip on the evening news, or who reads that comment in the newspaper, or who hears that segment on the radio.
Yeah, everything flows from your goal, and you should never get in front of the media without you want that outcome to be. Whether it's just a general press avail, where they get to fire whatever question they want to, you've got to be ready. You have a message you want to get out, and you should never let the tail wag the dog in terms of allowing them to set the agenda. You're always going to answer the question you want to answer, and that is derived from what your communications goal is, whether it's from your message calendar or from you're trying to push back against something. Know your goal before you call the damn thing. Before you start calling reporters, know what you want to get out of the interaction. And then keep in mind that we're talking about very short sound bites, limited column inches, and you want to make this story easy for them to write and to get published. So yeah, being laconic when it comes to picking as few words as possible to say something. Cut down your conversation from 10 minutes to 5. Spend 5 minutes extra preparing for it and working on some more memorable lines, and you'll be in good shape. So as we're wrapping up, so you've been around all kinds of campaigns from local municipal stuff to presidential side. You've been on with campaigns that won, that lost. What are some of the common traits that you see in campaigns, both as far as some of the character side as well as within the campaign and that campaign's culture, that you think most effectively determine the outcome?
Yeah, well, kind of zooming out from just the communications segment of a campaign, one thing that I'll always do in a campaign is lack of organization. No campaign that was not organized really ever won an election that was hard fought. There's some parts of this country where a Democrat can be a lawn chair on the ballot and win because it's got a D behind its name, or an R, conversely, in other parts. So you can run a horrible campaign in some places, but if you're actually in a contested seat, you have to have an organized campaign. There needs to be a clear flow of authority and responsibility from the candidate down to the volunteers. There needs to be an actual campaign plan, which I know my campaign coach lays out very specifically, like how many days out from election you need to be planning some of these things. You need to have a good fundraising plan. I've seen candidates who had a lot of charisma and personal potential fail because they didn't have the character and the discipline to be on the phones calling for dollars as much as they should have been. And that becomes more of an issue when you start running for maybe a state senate race and above, where it's going to cost a ton of money.
Right.
If you don't like fundraising, get used to it. Learn to love it. Realize it's part of you pitching as your sales pitch for why you're in this office.
It is.
So I've seen lack of interest in fundraising, lack of organization, and then also just a general confusion about vote goals can sometimes really trip a candidate up. You need to know that district inside and out, or your campaign manager should be able to brief you on that. And if you're running for local office, it's not hard. You can go pull some of the previous data from these elections, which, again, that's gone over in my campaign coach, so it's nothing terribly unique. But it's these little details that are never covered in the movies. They don't get covered in the TV shows.
Yeah.
House of Cards doesn't talk about precinct by precinct vote totals. and make it sound like it's a super exciting thing. But that's how you win an election. You win it by going out, by turning and burning on doors, talking to voters, by raising that cash, and by being organized. And if you're not talking to people and you're not touching voters with your door-to-door or phone bank opportunities, you're missing the boat. If you're not raising money all the time as a candidate, you're missing out. And if there's just no organization or sense of coherence as far as where we're going and why we're going and when we're going to do it with a campaign calendar, that's how you fall into that pitfall that turns into a death spiral real quick and dooms the campaign.
You're exactly right. That's something we're big on at My Campaign Coach through our coaching programs. Really trying to make sure that, because so much of this stuff can be planned out in advance before you ever announce and take on that stage or put out a press release. And that's going to give you more control, make sure that you're better able to roll with the punches when they do come, because they will, and increases your likelihood of winning exponentially throughout that entire process. So, Brian, I really appreciate you coming on today. We had a lot of fun just chatting about guns and Brian's time in the Wisconsin National Guard before we started to hit the record button. And maybe we'll have you back on and just riff on some of that later when we want an off week. But let people know before we hang up where they can find you online if they want to get more information from you or find out more about the great work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So mediatrackers.org is our website. I also write for The Resurgent, which is Eric Erickson's great online platform, which is theresurgent.com. I'm available on Twitter. So it's just at Brian Sikma. And then same thing at Facebook. It's just facebook.com/Brian Sikma. Feel free to hit me up. Would love to have any questions from anybody. I mean, My Campaign Coach is it's filling an important void here, kind of giving candidates and staff an opportunity to really kind of hone their skills before they pull the trigger. To go into some more in-depth information than other training programs out there that are still phenomenal, but it's always good to have more resources available. And so I think My Campaign Coach is doing a great job, and I'd love to hear from anybody who's going through this program or who listens to this podcast.
Sounds good. Well, you have a wonderful day, and we'll have you on sometime again soon. Thank you, sir.
Please subscribe and rate us on iTunes to help spread the word. We'll be back with you next week with more campaign insights from My Campaign Coach.